Good afternoon, seniors, colleagues, and my dear friends. Today's topic is chronic rhinosinusitis and nasal polyposis. Especially, I mean, it's a very routine topic, but today we'll discuss about sinusitis during pre and during COVID times, especially after the second wave, how the sinusitis has changed in post-COVID patients. First, we'll discuss about the rhinosinusitis and polyposis. An estimated 134 million Indians suffer from chronic sinusitis, and it is widespread than diabetes, asthma, and chronic heart disease.
सर अभी आ रहा
Kada full screen?
है नहीं दिख रहा है वाला कंप्यूटर के
Kada ఇది full screen, no?
यस फुल स्क्रीन పెడితే కనిపించట్లేదు
Okay, right. And it is, I mean, 1 in 8 Indians suffer from chronic rhinosinusitis, and it is mostly like mild and acute sinusitis will turn up to chronic rhinosinusitis. And it is mostly because in Indian continent, actually, it is because of the culture of self-medication, and mostly because of the quacks in practice. And if you look into the anatomy and physiology, you can just, I'll just show you this thing. These are the frontal sinuses, and then this is the middle turbinate, and this is the right nasal cavity, and this is left nasal cavity. And these are the major sinuses, like one is maxillary, and the other is, these are the ethmoids, these are the anterior and posterior ethmoids, and this is the sphenoid sinus. And this is the same actually diagrammatic representation, and these are the main sinuses. Actually, this is the maxillary, is the main biggest sinuses, and these are the orbits, and this is frontal, and this is the right and left nasal cavity. And if you look into the if you look into the diseases, common cold can lead to acute rhinosinusitis, and common cold is mainly because of the Streptococcus pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenzae, and then Moraxella catarrhalis. And then acute rhinosinusitis can turn up into chronic rhinosinusitis because of the multifactorial etiology. If you see the anatomy, look into the anatomy and physiology. In the first day, actually, the acute infection will take place. That is the common cold, what we call. It's because of the viral etiology. And this common cold will destroy the normal ciliated epithelium, which is present inside the nose and sinuses. So that impedes drainage of sinus. So because of the ciliary damage, there won't be, there will be pooling of secretions within the sinuses, and then that can lead to persistence of infection. That is a bacterial infection, and then a bacterial infection, and then after that it can lead to chronic sinusitis. If you look into the anatomy and physiology, as I told you, the destruction of mucosa will take place first, and then the healing occurs simultaneously. So during these changes, there will be hypertrophic sinusitis. That is, polypoidal changes will take place within the sinuses, and then that will lead to polyps, nasal polyps and all. And if suppose if there is an atrophy of the nasal mucosa, that can lead to atrophic sinusitis, which is very chronic and very difficult to treat. So mainly the surface epithelium is stratified squamous epithelium, and in that actually desquamation will take place, and then after the desquamation, regeneration or metaplasia will take place. And if you look into the anatomy and physiology, mainly the loss of cilia will lead to impaired drainage, as I told you before, and the impaired drainage can lead to the infection, and the infection can lead to the mucosal changes. So impaired drainage can be because of the polyps or deviated nasal septum, what we call, bone bend actually within the nose, and also adenoids in children. Most of the times, below 12 years, there will be a hypertrophy of adenoids, which can lead to frequent cold, and that can lead to secondary infection, and that can lead to polyps, subsequently. And also tumors can also lead to the impaired drainage. And also the most common factor, other common factor is allergy. Allergic rhinitis can lead to sinusitis, chronic sinusitis. If you look into the signs and symptoms, the common signs and symptoms of a sinus infection include headache, stuffy nose or running nose, that is the watery discharge from the nose, and loss of the sense of smell. Either it can be something like decreased sense of smell or complete anosmia, facial pain or pressure. These occurs mostly in acute sinusitis. Usually, suppose if there is some stagnation of secretions within the sinuses, that can lead to facial pain or pressure. And postnasal drip, that means actually mucus trickles into the nasopharynx from the nose, and that can give rise to sometimes even persistent cough also. And sore throat. Sore throat is because of the infection, chronic infection, and secretions dropping from the nose can lead to sore throat. And fever. Fever occurs mostly in acute sinusitis, and it is more common in mostly bacterial sinusitis. And also coughing. As I told you, it occurs in postnasal drip, and also fatigue. Fatigue is mostly seen in either acute or chronic sinusitis. If you look into the clinical features, in chronic sinusitis, usually they are vague and less compared to acute sinusitis. And purulent nasal discharge. Purulent nasal discharge is most common in acute sinusitis. And foul smelling. Foul smelling is mostly seen in anaerobic infections. And stuffiness of the nose and anosmia. Anosmia is mostly seen in polyps actually. And also sometimes it is seen in even hypertrophy turbinates. This is actually, radiographic image of the nose and paranasal sinuses. In this, you can see the difference actually. I will show you. This is the right maxillary sinus, and this is the left maxillary sinus. And you can see the haziness. This is the haziness within the maxillary sinus and also leading into the ethmoids. And this is a normal one actually. So this is the air-filled cavity, the sinuses. So, and these are the turbinates actually, right and left. If you look into the etiology of rhinosinusitis, allergy is the most common, and allergies of two types mainly: seasonal allergic rhinitis and perennial allergic rhinitis. And the next comes actually infection. Either it can be an acute infections or chronic infections. Chronic is mainly specific like bacterial, fungal, or non-specific infections. And sometimes, possibly host defense deficiency also, a defense mechanism also plays an important role in infection. And that means in immunocompromised patients like any post-transplant or immunodeficiency disease and all. And structural problems like osteometal complex. So, structural problems like osteometal complex, deviated nasal septum, and hypertrophic turbinates. Osteometal complex is, suppose if there are some polypoid tissue in the osteometal complex, that will impair the drainage of the sinuses, and also any deviated nasal septum. Gross deviation of the nasal septum can also impair the drainage of the sinuses, and even hypertrophy turbinates. And if you look at the other factors, dental and periapical abscess, underlying diseases like cystic fibrosis or cartilaginous syndrome, these congenital diseases can also cause very difficult chronic rhinosinusitis. occupational irritants and allergens, like in some particular occupations, like say mine workers and all, they can suffer from they will suffer from chronic rhinosinusitis. And drug-induced rhinitis medicamentosa. Drug-induced, like most of the times, actually, because of the over-counter medication, most of the patients they use actually xylometazoline nasal drops irregularly, like months together they use, and that intent can cause rhinitis medicamentosa, which is very difficult to treat, and the patients will suffer from a nasal obstruction. And classification of classification. If you look into the rhinosinusitis, there's mainly like with and without nasal polyps. So mainly two or more major symptoms, like say nasal blockage, anosmia or hyposmia, purulent nasal discharge or postnasal drip, and facial pain or pressure. Among these four symptoms, actually, two or more major symptoms should be present to classify it as a chronic rhinosinusitis. And endoscopic findings of polyps and mucopurulent discharge, edema or obstruction. And the other this thing is like CT scan abnormality. Like if you look into the CT scan, there will be mucosal changes within the osteometal complex or sinus cavities. Mainly, like if you take into the time factor, acute or intermittent sinusitis is like within 12 weeks. There will be complete resolution of symptoms. If the symptoms persist after 12 weeks, like if it is more than 12 weeks, if there is incomplete resolution of symptoms, then we can call it as chronic rhinosinusitis. Rhinosinusitis is mainly inflammation of the nose and paranasal sinuses, characterized by the presence of two or more symptoms, of which one must be nasal obstruction or rhinorrhea, and the second is facial pain or pressure, and the things hypo or hyposmia or anosmia. So among these four symptoms, two symptoms must be present to diagnose it as chronic rhinosinusitis. And the diagnostic endoscopic findings are polyps and are purulent secretions from the middle meatus and edema or mucosal obstruction. And CT changes are mucosal changes at the level of the osteometal complex or of the paranasal sinuses. As I told you, it is mainly like the cutoff point is 12 weeks duration. So if the symptoms resolve within 12 weeks, we can call it as an acute or sinusitis. If the symptoms persist even after 12 weeks without incomplete resolution of the symptoms and all, we can call it as a chronic sinusitis. Acute rhinosinusitis, if you look into the clinical features, I can just show you. Sudden onset of acute, it's an acute sinusitis case. You can see the purulent discharge within the middle meatus, this one. And this is the CT scan finding actually. This is the middle meatus, and you can see the filled cavity. This is the opacification within the maxillary antrum, right maxillary antrum, and this is the left maxillary antrum is also filled with some secretions. So there is sudden onset of symptoms, of which one must be nasal obstruction or rhinorrhea, and facial pain or pressure will be present, and also there is anosmia or hyposmia, and duration is less than 12 weeks as we discussed. And endoscopic findings are mainly purulent secretions from the middle meatus. This is actually, and edema or obstruction of the middle meatus. Allergic fungal rhinosinusitis is usually unilateral and it is most prevalent with occasional purulent secretions, and it is characterized by high levels of IL-4, IL-5 and IL-13. And different types of fungal sinusitis occurring concurrently or implications for therapy are invasive form and non-invasive form. Invasive form is acute fulminant and the chronic acute fulminant, and chronic is like granulomatous or invasive type. And non-invasive is allergic fungal rhinosinusitis, which is very common in the community. if you look into the diagnosis, diagnostic nasal endoscopy, we can, that improves disease diagnostic accuracy for chronic rhinosinusitis and should be emphasized as a diagnostic tool early in the clinical evaluation. And this nasal endoscopy may help reduce the CT utilization also, but definitely before going for surgery, if suppose if you are planning for an endoscopic sinus surgery, CT scan is a must actually, because we need to clear disease from all the sciences, and also the relation of the sciences to other the vital structures like orbits, intracranial artery, and all these things. So that will come across only in the CT scan. So diagnostic nasal endoscopy is an additional tool before going for surgery. But before surgery, actually, we have to evaluate with CT scan only. But in post-operative evaluation, we can use the diagnostic nasal endoscopy for for the follow-up of the cases. If you look into the reasons for sinusitis, 70% of bacterial sinusitis is caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenzae, and Moraxella catarrhalis. And other causative organisms include Staph aureus, Streptococcus pyogenes, gram-negative bacilli, and respiratory viruses. And these are respiratory viruses. They are the respiratory syncytial virus, like this swine flu previously, and now this COVID and all we can take into that we can consider. And if you look into the treatment, like therapy for acute rhinosinusitis, short course antibiotic treatment. These are actually a few studies actually. So different opinions are there from different studies. So just I'll just mention few of them. One study says that short course of antibiotic treatment had comparable effective than a long course of therapy. And in one more study in 2008 actually, that says that antibiotics should be reserved for carefully selected patients, not in like each and every patient antibiotics are necessary, because most of the times these acute sinusitis, or it starts as an acute sinusitis mainly of viral etiology. So usually symptomatically we'll treat, like say with antihistamines or anti-inflammatory and all. If suppose if it turns, maybe after a week or something, if it turns into purulent discharge or thick secretions, then we have to start a course of antibiotic. But usually initially antibiotics are not necessary in each and every patient. But most of the times what happens is patients usually they use over-the-counter drugs, and also sometimes because of the GPs and some quacks and all, usually they use antibiotics initially, and later on they develop bacterial resistant sinusitis and all. Most of the cases, resistance is because of the irrational use of antibiotics. And in one more study, like it says that 80% patients improve within 2 weeks of they improve with 2 weeks without antibiotics. And the patients improve within 2 weeks without antibiotics. And antibiotics are not justified even if a patient reports symptoms for longer than 7 to 10 days. Like as I told you, most of the times it is because of the viral etiology. So usually within 7 to 10 days, in most of the patients, antibiotics are not necessary. It's like a self-limiting disease. So after that, they suppose the symptoms increase, or if it turns into like purulent discharge or acute, severe pain and all, or headache, then antibiotics are indicated. Like topical steroid therapy, in this usually we use some nasal sprays like fluticasone, mometasone, budesonide and all. In most of the cases, like high dose intranasal corticosteroids are indicated, especially in polyps, nasal polyposis. But usually in rhinosinusitis and all, usually in allergic problems, usually without any purulent sinusitis and all, usually we prescribe topical steroid therapy, like topical corticosteroid sprays. And also in polyps, usually we use, and also sometimes even after the surgery, like after clearance of the disease from the sinuses, we prescribe a topical steroid therapy for a few months to control the allergy symptoms and to prevent recurrence. And if you look into the complications of acute rhinosinusitis, it is between 3 to 0.7 to 20%, and it can be orbital, intracranial, and bones. Orbital complications are more common. They constitute nearly 60 to 75% of the cases, and also intracranial complications. Intracranial complications are more common in fungal sinusitis, especially we have seen most of the intracranial complications during this, during this COVID actually, in post-COVID patients, especially after the second wave. Even we have seen few cases in the first wave, but very few. Probably because of the change in strains and all, we have seen many cases after the second wave. It's like not in just one region, it is spread, throughout India. And also bones complications. That is, it can lead to osteomyelitis of the like maxilla, and osteomyelitis of the orbital bones and all. So that can lead to, it is because of the chronic sinusitis, and also even in fungal sinusitis and all, it can lead to osteomyelitis. And if you look into the treatment summary, if suppose the symptoms are very severe, we can start topical steroids, oral antibiotics, oral steroids, and the investigations are CT scan, and nasal swab. If suppose when the symptoms are not improving after 14 days of treatment, so after 2 weeks, then we have to start with oral antibiotics, topical steroids, and then CT scan, and then nasal swab. In complications, like suppose if the sinusitis has lead to orbital complications or intracranial complications, then IV antibiotics or surgery is indicated, and then the patient needs admission. And for evaluation of the disease, we need CT scan and nasal swab, and if necessary in fungal sinusitis and all, we need contrast enhanced MRI. That is the gold standard investigation in fungal sinus, in mucar cases and all. If suppose if it's a rhinocerebro mucormycosis. If it is a chronic rhinosinusitis without nasal polyposis, so in that case, endoscopic sinus surgery improves the delivery of topical medications to the sinonasal mucosa. Mainly in this type of cases, actually endoscopic sinus surgery helps in clearing the disease, and also mainly for the irrigation and ventilation of the sinuses. Because as we clear that all the disease and polyps and all from the disease, there will be ventilation to all the sinuses. We make the sinus openings wide, and then we'll create more ventilation, and also that will clear this thing for the irrigation in the sense, like suppose if you use topical steroids, nasal sprays and all, that will be delivered to all the sinuses after clearing the disease, like after endoscopic sinus surgery. So why endoscopic sinus surgery? So this you see, this is just a diagrammatic representation. Okay, this is actually the polypid tissue, and this is the orbit, and this is one sinus cavity, and this is the nasal cavity. So this is actually this polyp is completely occupying and obstructing the frontal sinus and also the maxillary sinus. So after endoscopic sinus surgery, we have cleared all the disease from this side. So there is ventilation to this frontal sinus and also to the maxillary. This is maxillary. So there is ventilation to the maxillary sinus and also to the frontal sinus, and the disease is cleared. When ventilation is more, ventilation is good, and also delivery of the topical drugs, like say topical steroid sprays and all, will be good to these sinuses. So it removes paranasal obstruction, and also improves ventilation and drainage of sinuses, and reduce number of exacerbations and reduce complications. And probability of success of endoscopic sinus surgery. it is like in recurring sinusitis is good. The success of endoscopic sinus surgery is maximal. And also sinusitis affecting only one sinus. If suppose if it is a say unilateral disease, say only on one side, say the results will be good in one sinus. On if the sinusitis is unilateral, then fungal ball. Say fungal ball is usually they are present in maxillary sinuses. So if it, in that case actually if a fungal ball is removed and the osteometal complex is wide open, then the results will be very good. And also mucosal, antrocranial polyps, and orbital or intracranial complications. In this, the probability of success of endoscopic sinus surgery is maximal. Alright. This is intermediate in rhinosinusitis with polyposis, with extensive polyposis, like say bilateral disease or with extensive polyposis, the probability of success of endoscopic sinus surgery is intermediate. And also with asthma, suppose the rhinosinusitis is associated with asthma, in that case also the results will be like moderate. And they are not very good in conditions like cystic fibrosis, Cartagenous syndrome, and some other congenital ciliary motility disorders. Like say in Cartagenous syndrome, what happens is there will be dyskinetic ciliary movement within the maxillary sinuses, within the lungs, and also say wherever the cilia is present, like say within the oviduct and all, wherever the ciliary movement is disordered. So in that case, what happens is the secretions will get pulled up in the sinuses, like say in the maxillary antrum, because there is no proper ciliary movement. The secretions won't reach the maxillary ostium, so they won't come out. So they will get stagnated within the maxillary sinus because of this dyskinetic ciliary movement in Cartagenous syndrome. So what happens is, even if we do surgery, endoscopic sinus surgery in Cartagenous syndrome, say for sinusitis and polyposis, again because of the congenital disorder, like say because of the dyskinetic ciliary movement, because of the improper ciliary movement, again the recurrence rate will be very high, and very soon the patients will develop again sinusitis and polyposis. Functional endoscopic sinus surgery of paranasal sinus surgery is for fungal balls actually. So I'll just show you this one. This is actually the middle turbinate, and this is the middle meatus, and this is during the surgery actually. This is the intra picture. So after, this is the maxillary antrum, and you can see this is the fungal ball. So okay, and this is the post-operative picture. So after clearing all this fungal ball, you can see the sinus mucosa is very healthy, and the opening of the maxillary antrum is wide open, like osteometal complex. This is wide open. Ventilation is very good, and there is a good dryness of the sinuses. So this is the main concept actually in doing endoscopic sinus surgery, like disease clearance, ventilation, and proper dryness. So if we look into the management, first we have to identify the etiology which obstructs the sinus dryness and ventilation. That is, it can be structural, like say as I said, there are deviated nasal septum, or turbinate hypertrophy, or adenoids, or any polyps and all. So first that etiology has to be identified, and then according to that we have to manage the disease. And workup for nasal allergy may be required. If suppose the patients are more allergic, so sometimes we have to identify the allergen. So that can help to reduce the allergic events. So either we have to send them for a desensitization so that the allergic events will be reduced, and then that will stop the any hypertrophy of the nasal turbinates or any edematous mucus and all, if the allergic incidents are decreased. And then culture and sensitivity. So this helps in antibiotic selection. And then the treatment, how we go. First, initially conservative treatment, and then later we have to consider the surgeries. Conservative treatment is mainly by antibiotics, decongestants, antihistamines, and sinus irrigations. And sinus irrigations usually they come after the surgery most of the times, but in some allergic conditions and all, usually we put irrigations even before surgery also. And last comes the surgeries. It is mainly endoscopic sinus surgery, either conventional method or in some other with using some other gadgets like microdebrider and all. So this leads to free dryness and ventilation. So first, initially, we'll discuss about the antral puncture. That is, those are practiced long back. Even now, there are few indications for these procedures. So chronic maxillary sinusitis. The first thing is actually antral puncture and irrigation. So this is most commonly done procedure during our UZ days, and the patient is kept in sitting position, and then we used to, with a trocar and cannula, we used to puncture the maxillary antrum and do irrigation. And then even after that, the patient will be, the patient will be taught how to do, this sinus irrigation and all. And then after that, there's one more procedure like intranasal antrostomy. In this also, the maxillary antrum will be opened, and then the irrigation is practiced. And then there's one more like a Caldwell-Luck operation. This is a radical surgery. Like I'll just show you. There is an incision given at the, this just, at the, this is a teeth and this is a labia at the gingiva. Sublabial incision at the gingiva. This is the anterior wall of the maxilla. There is an opening made in the anterior wall of the maxilla. This is the anterior wall of the maxilla, and an opening made either with a micromotor or with a goose and hammer. And then through this opening, the disease or whatever the any mass in the maxillary antrum is cleared, and after that again this mucosal incision will be closed. This is a more radical procedure, but now there are still few indications, like suppose if there is a mass within the nasal cavity or a big dentigerous cyst which is causing enlargement of the cavity, maxillary antrum and all. In that case, actually, Caldwell is a very good option. And sometimes we do in both the sides, like say endoscopic sinus surgery and Caldwell, like we both combine and then disease all the clear all the disease. Frontal sinusitis. In this, intranasal drainage operations like a correction of deviated nasal septum and removal of a polyp or intranasal ethmoidectomy is done to provide drainage through the frontonasal duct. Usually, any polyps in the middle meatus or the ethmoids and all will obstruct the frontonasal duct. So most of the times we need to clear that polypar tissue within the ethmoids to get, to get a drainage for the frontonasal duct. Either external frontal ethmoidectomy is done or trephination of frontal sinus. This is a bit, radical procedure, and osteoplastic flap operation. Sphenoid sinusitis. Sphenoidotomy is one. Directly we can open the sphenoid ostium, which is present on the anterior wall, and sinus entered through anterior wall in this. And usually it is associated with ethmoid disease. Hence, ethmoidectomy is done before that, and then after that, sphenoid sinus is opened. But rarely we come across only just haziness within the sphenoid sinus. And most of the times in that case, actually, we find some fungal ball within the sphenoid sinus. So if it is only the disease is seen, the haziness in the CT scan is seen within the sphenoid sinus. In that case, actually, directly we can open the sphenoid sinus from the anterior wall and clear all the disease, make the opening wide, and then we will create a good window for the irrigation and all. And we can remove the intersphenoid septum also, and we'll make it a wide cavity. And if you see the recent advances in endoscopic sinus surgeries, rigid endoscopes has completely changed the scenario. And functional endoscopic sinus surgery is the most commonly done procedure nowadays for this chronic sinusitis and nasal polyposis. And in this, actually, microdebrider is a powered instrument, which is now routinely used in higher centers. If you look into the endoscopic sinus surgery with microdebrider assisted, I'm just discussing, it is very precise because microdebrider has got like it will cut the tissue, irrigate, cut and suction. So it is very precise and relatively blood loss is less and there is minimal crust formation because the trauma is less when compared to the conventional when compared to the surgery doing with the conventional instruments and rapid mucosal healing is seen and Sinecave formation is less and then operative time is less because of the powered instrument and it is definitely a good tool but it's not a prerequisite. Right. Now the other part like we'll see about the fungal sinusitis. Previously it is the fungal sinusitis cases are very less actually, especially we used to see in like say immunocompromised patients like post transplant or those who are immunocompromised and also in diabetic patients like those who are having uncontrolled diabetes and all. The fungal sinusitis is very common and most of the patients, like say, if you take one study, this is actually 242 patients have been diagnosed with chronic rhinosinusitis. Among that, 67 patients had fungal sinusitis, either clinically or radiologically. But only in 24 patients, the fungal organisms were identified. In some cases, in most of the cases, actually, even if we send the tissue, what we have taken from the maxillary antrum and or any ethmoids or any sphenoid and all, usually most of the times the fungal organisms are not either are not grown in cultures, fungal cultures. And previously, it was the majority were Aspergillus fumigatus, 90%, and then followed by Aspergillus niger and Aspergillus flavus. Now, during COVID, this completely the scenario has changed now. After, especially in post-COVID patients, the mucor has taken over the first place. It's not only in Andhra Pradesh, it's throughout India. The scenario is completely changed in post-COVID patients. Mucor has occupied the first place, followed by Aspergillus. So I just want to mention about these things. During the first wave, actually, these mucor cases were less. Even though we have seen few cases, but it was the incidence was less. But after the second wave, probably because of the change in strains or some, even in patients who are not hospitalized, who didn't take any steroids, who were not, who were not put on any oxygen concentrators or any oxygen these things. Even in those patients, just even patients who are at home isolation also, post COVID, if they have any symptoms of like sinusitis and all, if we do a scan, if suppose if we the CT scan is showing some haziness in the maxillary sinus or ethmoids and all, we suggest, we just, advise them for an endoscopic surgery and to clear the disease because we are not sure whether it is a fungal sinusitis or a normal sinusitis. And surprisingly, those who are, not hospitalized and without any oxygen, those who didn't use any steroids also, even in those patients, mucor and Aspergillus was isolated within the maxillary antrum. Mainly, the fungal sinusitis is four types like fungal ball, allergic fungal sinusitis, chronic invasive sinusitis, and fulminant fungal sinusitis. The fulminant is more common in mucor. This you can see the fungal ball. So you can just this is a CT scan. This you can see the hyperdense shadow. This hyperdense shadow indicates that is actually double density or hyperdense shadow. This indicates like it, it is actually suspicion of fungal sinusitis. We can't say whether it is a normal or purulent material or a fungal ball. So this is actually intra picture. This you can see the fungal ball. So allergic fungal sinusitis is very common even before also. It's not in like even pre-COVID actually. So this is mainly because due to allergic reaction due to causative fungus and it presents with sinonasal polyposis and mucin. And a CT scan shows mucosal thickening with hyperdense areas. I shown you before that CT scan, there is hyperdense areas. and sometimes there may be bone erosion and expansion of sinus, but no fungal invasion into mucosa. And treatment is endoscopic surgical clearance, drainage and ventilation, and pre and post operative steroids, either oral steroids and also intranasal steroid sprays. Next one is chronic invasive sinusitis, fungal invasion into sinus mucosa. This presents with chronic rhinosinusitis, may present with intracranial or intraorbital invasion. Mucor has mostly, like in mucor patients, mucormycosis, especially in this post-COVID, many of them are presented with orbital involvement, especially the lamina papyracea is eroded in these patients, and then usually they present with either swelling of the eye or proptosis, and some patients there will be with a double vision, or even some patients they lost the vision. If suppose the patients lost the vision and all, sometimes we are forced to do orbital accentration as a very, radical surgeries. So initially, if suppose the patient is having some, if we are suspecting some fungal sinusitis with orbital involvement, we used to do endoscopic debridement and then orbital decompression. Now we used to remove the lamina papyracea and then orbital periosteum is incised. And if suppose if there is some diseased orbital fat, we used to clear all the diseased orbital fat and then remove the any orbital bone, like say floor of the orbit. If part of the floor of the orbit is not healthy, we used to remove that, because otherwise it can lead to some osteomyelitis, chronic problems and all. So most of the times, like with orbital complications and all, we used to do orbital decompression. If suppose if there is an intracranial extension, that is one indication for, it's not surgically we can't do, most of the times it's an indication. So usually sometimes if they develop any frontal abscess and all, then the frontal abscess is drained, and then after that they are put on antifungals, intravenous antifungals. And CT, like CT in this case, patients, CT shows mucosal thickening, opacification of sinus, bone erosion, and expansion. Bone, especially like say orbital floor and or medial wall of the orbit, and sometimes mainly the maxilla and the palate bone is involved. If suppose the palate is involved, sometimes we have to do partial maxillectomy or even total maxillectomy also in some patients. If it is like a mucor, if it is clinically or like say after any fungal cultures or fungal staining, if the mucor is confirmed, then we have to do partial maxillectomy or total maxillectomy also. Mucor, and one more thing with mucor is like we can see the blackish discoloration, Ishar formation. And the other thing is fungal staining and culture. This is very important investigation during the surgeries, actually before the surgery. Sometimes if suppose if we can see some tissue within the nose, then we can send them for fungal staining. So fungal staining, we take the tissue and then we'll send it in a normal saline. So if we suppose if we can see some either mucor or aspergillus, then according to that we have to plan. In some patients actually during our approximately we had done nearly 45 cases of the fungal sinusitis cases, after this second wave of COVID. So in most of the patients, like say nearly 10 patients we got aspergillus, and approximately 35 patients got mucormycosis. So even in all these patients, actually in fungal staining, actually initially we didn't get, maybe I think in 3 or 4 patients, we didn't get any fungus in fungal staining. But later after 3 or 4 days, the tissue, the culture, in that culture actually the fungus started growing. Then again, we changed actually depending on that. If suppose if it is an aspergillus, we started them on IV oriconazole or oral oriconazole. If suppose if it is a mucor, then we started with either IV amphotericin B or posaconazole or isavuconazole. And next comes the histopathology. Even we used to we used to send a tissue for even histopathology in these patients. Treatment is mainly surgical removal of involved mucosa, bone and soft tissues. That is in fungal sinusitis I'm talking about, with either orbital involvement or intracranial involvement in some patients. So if suppose if the orbit or if the palate is involved, say maxilla, medial wall of the maxilla or floor of the maxilla is involved and the bone got destroyed, then we have to do maxillectomy, partial maxillectomy or total maxillectomy initially, and then after that we have put them on IV amphotericin B for few weeks depending on the response and all. And in some patients IV or oral posaconazole. And those these patients, if suppose if they develop any nephrotoxicity or anything, then we started them on oral isavuconazole, which is very less nephrotoxic. And then in some patients, actually those who are diagnosed as aspergillosis, they started on IV or oral oriconazole. And mainly, if the patients are on IV amphotericin B, then we used to monitor liver function tests and also renal markers like creatinine and blood ureas. We have to monitor. And then if suppose if the patient develops any nephrotoxicity, then we have to definitely change the drug. And oriconazole is less nephrotoxic. Usually patients, those who are on oriconazole, they didn't develop any nephrotoxicity or any altered liver function tests and all. Fulminant fungal sinusitis. This is an acute presentation. You can, and mostly it is seen in immunocompromisation or diabetics, and mainly it is by mucar. Fulminant is mainly by mucar, and next comes the aspergillus. Its mucar is very like it's a rhino-orbitocerebral disease. It's a dreadful fungus. It involves all the sinuses and orbit and also intracranial extension. That is rhino-orbitocerebral disease. It is mainly because of the invasion of blood vessels. Mucar invades the blood vessels. Due to that, ischemic necrosis will take place and black Ishar formation involving the inferior turbinate, palate and our sinuses will take place, and it spreads to face, eyes, skull base and brain. And the treatment is mainly surgical debridement, as I told you, of necrotic tissues and also orbital decompression. And sometimes if the vision is lost and the eye is completely involved, then orbital accentration. And sometimes depending on the involvement of the maxilla, either partial maxillectomy or total maxillectomy. And sometimes if the frontal lobe abscess or something develops, then some frontal lobe abscess or anything that has to be drained. And after that, followed by IV amphotericin B is the drug of choice. And one more thing is like contrast enhanced MRI is that, especially in mucar patients, in mucormycosis patients, where is the orbit and brain are involved. Contrast enhanced MRI is the gold standard investigation. In that, we'll come to know about the soft tissue involvement and all. So, and even after the surgery, for follow-up also, contrast enhanced MRI is very good in assessing the disease and also any extension of the disease even after post-operative, for assessing the prognosis, in assessing the prognosis and all. The CE-MRI, contrast enhanced MRI is very good. And in aspergillus, there is no Ishar formation because it won't involve the blood vessels. This is endoscopic sinus surgery. It's a minimally invasive. It does not require any skin incisions. And we do removal of intervening bone to access the disease. Like say, the septum or any turbinates. We remove the all the sinuses, bone, intravenous bony septum and all. So we create good access to all the sinuses in this procedure, and we establish ventilation and dryness of the sinuses, preventing the nasal and sinus mucosa healthy. We make the sinuses openings and nasal opening wide, and then we prevent any recurrence of the disease. And the indications is chronic bacterial sinusitis unresponsive to medical treatment is an indication for endoscopic sinus surgery. Recurrent acute bacterial sinusitis is an indication, and if suppose if there is some polypoidal formation within the sinuses, that's one more indication. And fungal sinusitis definitely we have to do with fungal bulbs or any polyposis. And endocrine polyp is also an indication. And mucosal of frontoethmites or sphenoid senses. And if you look into the contraindications, inexperience and lack of proper instrumentation. That's one contraindication. If you don't have proper instruments and all, then better not to do the endoscopic sinus surgeries. And endoscopic inaccessible areas like lateral frontal sinus disease and the lateral skull base also. That's a contraindication if suppose lateral skull base is involved. Then osteomyelitis. As I told you, this fungal sinusitis can cause osteomyelitis in chronic disease and all. So in that case, actually, it's a contraindication for endoscopic procedures and threatened intracranial or intraorbital complications. But normally, if suppose orbital involvement is present, we can do orbital decompression and also to some extent we can clear the disease. But if it is a threatened intraorbital complication, like say vision is lost and optic nerve is involved, say apex of the till the disease is present up to the optic nerve and all. In that case, actually, better go for an open procedures. Anesthesia and general anesthesia is preferred in all these cases because local anesthesia with IV sedation can be used only when limited work is to be done. But in extensive diseases like either bacterial sinusitis or any polyposis or any fungal sinusitis, general anesthesia is the preferred one. And if you look into the techniques, there are two schools actually: Stamberger's technique and Wigand's technique. Stamberger's is from anterior to posterior. It starts from uncinate process and proceed backwards to sphenoid sinus. And the reverse in case of Wigand's. In Wigand's technique, we start from posterior and we come anterior. That means we start at the sphenoid sinus and we come along the skull base, we come anteriorly to the up to the maxilla and medial orbital wall. And post-operative care. Usually, most of the times, after the surgery, we put some either Merosal packs or ribbon gauze to prevent Seneca formation and to retain the cavities. In these things. So what this thing is, after that we have to remove the nasal packs and then antibiotics depending on these things, either IV or oral has to be given. Antihistaminics, analgesics, nasal irrigation, post-operatively to prevent crust formation and to clear all the crusts and all. And steroid nasal sprays, they play a very important role in allergic rhinitis and also in nasal polyposis and all, because they prevent recurrence. Steroid nasal sprays are used for a long time in allergic patients, in allergic rhinosinusitis patients. We use for years together sometimes. And endoscopic toilet. Endoscopic toilet, like post-operatively, to clear all the crusts and all, sometimes we need to do periodically, maybe in the first few weeks, we need to do endoscopic toilet to clear all the crusts and all, and review. Post-operative follow-up is very important in nasal polyposis and also in fungal sinusitis. And as I brief this thing, like most of the times we see allergic rhinosinusitis and also nasal polyposis very commonly, and fungal sinusitis is rarely we see, and especially we see fungal bulbs and all in allergic rhinosinusitis. And in diabetics, and we had to suspect mucor or aspergillus in immunocompromised patients or in diabetics, those who are having uncontrolled diabetes, and also any transplant patients and all. But nowadays, actually, because of this COVID and all, and especially in post-COVID patients, because it has become a national issue. So, probably we don't know how long will it, these waves will continue and all. So we have to be very cautious we have to be very cautious and we have to be suspicious in fungal, in sinusitis patients. Like we have to suspect fungal sinusitis, either a mucor or aspergillus in post-COVID patients. So even without any symptoms, even if a small just a small haze, minimal haziness is there in maxillary sinuses or ethmoids and all, we just either, if it is not established, we just can't rule out. without any symptoms also. If we send the secretions from the maxillary, either the tissue or secretions from the maxillary sinus or rhythmoids, if we send them for fungal stain, in many patients we got either aspergillus or mucor. So, I mean, from now onwards, I mean, especially during this, I mean, the post-COVID patients and all, we had to be very cautious and we had to keep an eye on these fungal sinusitis. So the main idea is actually to just, I mean, to mention about this fungal sinusitis importance nowadays. And if we look into the complications, the major complications are orbital hemorrhage, and then loss of vision, diplopia, CSF leaks, meningitis, brain abscess, and massive hemorrhage requiring transfusion, intracranial hemorrhage, anosmia, and injury to intracranial artery. And minor complications like periorbital ecchymosis, periorbital emphysema, epistaxis, post-op sinusitis, and rhinitis, and additions like Seneca formation, exacerbation of asthma, hyposmia, and dental pain. Thank you very much. Thank you one and all.